everyone. Welcome to the EquiLead Dialogues, a series of conversations through which we aim to spotlight incredible leaders who, through their work and dedication, are driving phenomenal work across the landscape of social impact. Additionally, with the EquiLead Dialogues, we will also document perspectives on what all does a conducive ecosystem for accelerating gender equity at workplaces really mean. My name is Mitalee, the comms lead of the EquiLead initiative that is supported by Arthan Foundation and Climate Asia, and your host for this conversation. The theme for today's discussion is the role of feminist leadership in organizational development. And joining me for this is Levis Nderitu, the Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at PATH. Before we kickstart the conversation, allow me to introduce Levis, and I will try my level best to capture his inspiring journey. Levis has more than 12 years of experience in DEI, culture, and employee engagement across East Africa, Europe, and the United States. Prior to joining PATH, he held positions at Doctors Without Borders, One Acre Fund, and Oxfam Novib, where he developed and executed on cultural transformation, gender, and DEI strategies, touching on all levels of the organizations. Levis holds a Master of Arts in Social Policy for Development from Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands, an MBA, and a Bachelor of Commerce and Marketing from the University of Nairobi. He also holds executive certificates in PR strategy, diversity, and inclusion from Cornell University, as well as business and entrepreneurship from the University of Texas at Austin. In his current role, Levis is responsible for refining and implementing PATH's DEI strategy and recently won the PATH 2023 Vision Award in the Enablers category. Welcome to the EquiLead Dialogues, Levis.
Thank you so much, Mitalee, for having me. As you're, going through the bio, I'm like, is that me?
It's definitely you, and it speaks volumes about the kind of work that you've done. And of course, that's why we have you here, so we can pick your brain and our audience can learn more as well. So without further ado, let me straight away jump into today's theme of the conversation and my first question. What does feminist leadership mean to you? In your experience, how does feminist leadership differ from traditional leadership models, and what unique value does it bring to an organizational culture?
Thank you, Mitalee. For us to really talk about feminist leadership, we must first understand or define what is really feminism or who is a feminist, right? And for me, a feminist is someone who believes that men and women and people of other genders do have equal opportunities and should have equal opportunities. And it's just basically like that. So if you believe men and women or all people of all genders should have equal rights and equal opportunities, then you're a feminist. It's that simple. And so feminist leadership then fundamentally believes in that people of all genders should have equal rights and equal opportunities. For me, when I think about it, I think about my mother, that my mother should have the same rights, the same opportunities as my father. I think about my younger sister who just finished university. I'm hoping that she will live in a world where, she will have equal access in terms of job opportunities, in terms of career promotion, the right to choose what she wants to do with her body, right? That for me is feminism or being a feminist. And therefore, feminist leadership then creates that environment where men and women and people of all genders really have those equal opportunities and rights within, say, an organization, for example. When I think about the stereotypes we grew, seeing, about, when we had, when we're kids, if we hear a doctor, immediately our mind would think about a man who's a doctor. When we hear a nurse, would probably imagine a woman. one would hear a pilot, would think about a man, However, seeing some of the advancements that have, happened within feminist leadership, we are now seeing more women pilots, more women doctors, and even women presidents, right? And I think that's the kind of future that we want to live in. Those are the kind of societies we want to live in. And so therefore, feminist leadership then creates these, fast removes the barriers to accessing these opportunities, creates those environments where everyone or people of all genders actually thrive, and they see the possibilities that are there for them. That, for me, is what feminist leadership is all about.
So, taking from what you've said about how we create these stereotypes about certain roles that men versus women play and how they're embedded, these kind of stereotypes also exist in organizations. So, how do you think feminist leadership principles can be applied in diverse global organizations, especially like yours at Path, particularly in promoting gender equity and inclusion across different cultural contexts?
Yes, when we think about the role of feminist leadership in creating organizations that are truly diverse, truly inclusive, and it talked about also tying it into some of the stereotypes that we see within the workplace. I'll give examples. When we think about competence, most of the time, people associate men with competence in terms of, they're competent to be a manager and all of these things and leaders. But for women, there is this double bind, sort of like, can you be competent and likable at the same time, right? Because we see the people who say get promoted are most likely the ones who are more likable, right? Rather than actually, when you think about competence. So there's that double bind between competence and likability. And for a woman who is competent and is a go-getter, there's the price you pay for likability. People will say, oh, she's too this, she's too this. When you're too nice, you're too likable, again, you're not perceived as competent. So there's that sort of double bind. So we see that within organizations. We also see who actually gets promoted, right? Most of the time in societies like, say there are societies like yours and mine, the African and Asian societies, we have seen, sort of from the cultural norms that women don't, speak out as much in meetings, for example. They don't interrupt. Men do that a lot of times. They interrupt, they speak up. And so for women, when you're there waiting for the permission, that means you have these brilliant ideas that you want to put forth, but you can't because of, sort of those, sort of norms or environments that do not, quite champion, an equal or a level playing field. We also see biases that exist. Say, for example, mothers face this challenge where you're seen as less committed, to the work. And therefore, you are left out of promotions because the assumption is, you're taking time to care for your family. Then you're not as committed to the organizations. So example after example after example, we see these biases come up, both in hiring, in promotion, in inclusion, the whole spectrum. And one of the things that I know to be true is that bias is like interest. It compounds. And there's a study that was actually done, and the study, what they showed is that if you have 5% of bias against women, say in the performance evaluation, and you have 8 rounds of promotions. So what they found out, if you started with 58% women, by the time it's 8 rounds of promotions, guess what you find? only 29% of women will be remaining, half of that. So bias actually compounds. They could be very small, but the impact of that is significant. Even when you think about salaries, Mitalee, right? If most of the time we see women get underpaid, we see those gender pay gaps. And in 10 years, if you're underpaid in year one, the difference between your income or total compensation in 10 years is significantly different. And so organizations that embrace feminist leadership, like what we do at PATH, is to look at some of the barriers that exist, particularly for women, and removing those barriers in terms of that work. And I'm happy to talk about that more, but over to you.
Will take you up on your offer on you wanting to talk about more about things that you're doing at PATH, because PATH recently unveiled its Gender Strategy 2025. So apart from that, could you also share some examples where feminist leadership has led to tangible changes in policies or practices at PATH, and that has promoted more inclusive culture in the organization?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mitalee, and thank you for acknowledging. We just launched our gender strategy, and it's just amazing to see how it's guiding us in terms of being a truly intentional organization in terms of, gender inclusion. In terms of some of the tangible things that we have done at PATH, one is when you look at our recruitment and hiring and promotion. Let me talk about that. So we've been intentionally, particularly at the leadership level where we saw gaps, promoting women at the leadership level. 2 years ago, our executive team was just about 36-37% women. 2 years later, now the executive team is 56% women. It's now majority women-led, which is fascinating. And then what we've also done, we've partnered with our HR team, or talent acquisition, want to train them on inclusive recruitment, so that the recruitment has a fair share of both men, women, and people who maybe might identify as gender non-conforming. We've also reviewed and looked at our job descriptions, right? So much of the time, our job descriptions have very masculine language. And what we learned, some of the feedback, I remember receiving this feedback in DRC Congo. One of the ladies came to me and said, I'd like to apply for certain jobs, but when I read those jobs, it almost seems that they're looking for a man. For example, and she pointed out and she said, I have a family, so a job that requires a lot of traveling basically is not for me. So you're locking out women in that regard. So we're actually looking at our job descriptions and ensuring that they are at the minimum level gender neutral in that regard. Then the other thing we did is about a year and a half, we reviewed our HR system. So we moved from a traditional HR system to a new one. And traditionally, we used to ask people their previous salaries. And I remember when I was hired, about 3 years ago, I was asked my previous salary. And I was thinking, oh my God, I used to earn so little. Will the fact that I used to earn little determine the amount of money or compensation that I will get? And studies have actually shown that women negotiate less, particularly when they're negotiating for themselves. They do not actually negotiate for themselves. They're more comfortable negotiating for others. And so we decided we were not going to be asking people their previous salaries, right? And so what that meant is more gender pay parity for men and women within the organization. Then the other thing we've done, I'll take an example of Ghana. So we have an office in Ghana. And I remember my assistant, we hired her when she was 7 months pregnant. So she was expecting a baby. This is a year and a half ago. And then the baby came. And now the baby is about a year and a half, thereabouts. And now the mom needs to go to with the baby to the office. and we did not have a baby's room in the Ghana office. So last month, we just launched a baby's room in the Ghana's office, right? And so that again shows our intentionality in terms of ensuring that we're actually creating an environment, where women and men thrive equally. Two more examples, because we have rich examples at PAP. In Kenya, about 2 years ago, we were renovating the Kenya office. And one of the things we're very intentional about is the bathrooms, right? Instead of, just men, women, now we actually have a gender neutral bathroom in the Kenyan office, which is fantastic. It's gender neutral, and also it's disability inclusive in that regard. And finally, in terms of some of the progress that we've also seen, is when you think about advancing women in leadership roles, about 2.5 years, we partnered with McKinsey in one of their programs, which they call the McKinsey Leadership Academies. And so this program is really tied to building particularly women of color capabilities to get into leadership roles. And 60%, we've had around 60% of women, Hispanic women, Asian women, and Black women, be part of that program. So at PATH, we're doing all these multiple things in our people, in looking at our practices, as well as our health programs. And the gender strategy really looks at how our programs can be more gender intentional. So there's a whole lot we could talk about in terms of the progress we've actually made in really being a feminist organization, or a gender inclusive organization.
That is so heartening to hear, and such amazing and so good to hear. Apart from the statistics, the kind of processes and policies and practices you've put in place to ensure that women in your organization thrive into leadership. And you rightly brought out the recruitment process and how men and women perceive how they fit into a particular role, because it is kind of statistically proven that even if women fit into say 80% of they check all the boxes, they still feel underconfident in applying for a role versus a man who would probably apply even if it's just 20%, even if they checklist 20%. So really great to hear that. And earlier you spoke about our culture, which is shared because we both come from the global south. So as the first DEI head at PATH, what were some of the challenges you faced to bring the DEI in focus? And how has the perspective from Global South changed the organizational priorities of PATH since you've taken over?
Mitalee, that's a very hard question. Yes, the challenges have been were numerous, but also the opportunities were equally the same. But I think one of the main challenges, speaking around that, was to really make our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy truly global. Because most of the time what I found was the strategy was well done, correct, but it was very US-centric. And so that was part of my biggest role. How do we truly make this strategy global as a global organization? Because we are building a truly global organization that ensures all the voices, both from Global North and Global South, are actually heard. And so one was to revise that strategy so that it actually reflects the voices of the people, right? And the people here is all people from Global South, Global North. And so there was a lot of listening that I had to do, listening to the staff in different countries in Africa and Asia and Europe and the US as well, to really ensure that the strategy was truly global. I think that was one of the major challenges. How do you really transform that in a way that honors the work that had already been done, but at the same time moves us forward to this, truly global organization? The other challenge I also found at the time was that, particularly when I think about our Women at PATH group, so we had a Women at PATH group that was led by amazing women from Washington, D.C., right? And we felt, the women, say, in Africa and in Asia, for example, did not have, real opportunity to participate in that women's group, that was necessary for them to participate in. So one of the things I did was to go to the different countries and talk to the different women, because this has to be, really led by their employees. And when I went to these different countries, there's this energy from the women in those countries to start their own thing within those countries. So it started in DRC Congo, moved to Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, whatever. Right now, we have about 8 women at path groups distributed across the world. And the recent newcomers is Women at Path India, which was just launched about 2 months ago. And then Senegal followed after, I think, last month as well. And so what that happened in terms of really ensuring that the Global South voice is actually heard is that almost like a decentralization, localization, or regionalization, depending on how you may want to call it. So particularly we saw that. And then from a DEI standpoint also, what I found was there was this one big DEI advisory group. It was inclusive, rather no, it was diverse. It was diverse, that was the word. It was diverse, but how inclusive it was, that was debatable. And we realized, speaking of culture, the loudest voices happened to be, American voices. So most of the time, it was their issues that were at the forefront. And we realized for us to truly have the Global South voice, then we needed to regionalize that. So we, what I did was I said, okay, fine, let's have 3, instead of having one, advisory group, let's have 3 of them per region. So now we have the Africa DEI Council, we have the Americas DEI Council, and we have one for Asia, Middle East, and Europe. And that changed everything, because now the priorities of DEI are driven by those regions and from those regions. And the impact of that, part of the impact of that is more ownership, more sense of ownership in terms of the work, and commitment to the work, that sense of loyalty and belonging and voice, right? We're talking about feminist leadership, and part of feminist leadership is really the power. You have the power and the voice to make decisions for your own country, for your own region. And today, we see that also reflected in our executive team. Now, 44% of the executive team is people of color from the Global South. That is massive, and so that's some of the progress that we have seen in terms of both seeing the challenge as well as coming up with solutions to drive our business strategy as well.
I think what Path is doing in terms of the DI priorities, I think kind of sets an example globally, because a lot of times for global organizations, especially, because there's nothing we have rooted in our cultural context, we kind of copy models and theoretical ideas from the North, which don't really fit in with our cultural models and our lived realities. So speaking of challenges, what role do you think power dynamics play in feminist leadership, and how can leaders effectively navigate these dynamics to foster a more equitable and inclusive work environment?
When I think of power, I think of voice. I think of influence. I think of decision making, right? So when I hear the word power, that's what I think of. I think about whose voices are being heard, whose ideas, are being taken upon, who has a seat at the table in the first place, right? Because you actually need that seat at the table so that your voice actually gets heard. So when I think about power, that's what sort of comes to mind. For Path as an organization, much of our work happens in Africa and in Asia. And so been very intentional in terms of ensuring that the leadership, the work is driven by the people from those countries. And I can tell you, I think in 98% of all of our country offices is being led by people from those countries, 98%, if not more. I think it's just one country, that has, sort of an expat. But all of the countries is actually, people from those local, regions. That means it's the priorities of those countries that are being, prioritized. And then also in terms of our model, we ensure that our health priorities, because we're a global health nonprofit, we ensure that our health priorities are reflective of the government's health priorities. So if the government of Kenya's health priority is universal health coverage, then that's what we'll prioritize, right? If the priorities of the Kenyan government is to ensure that there is malaria eradication by whatever period of time, then that becomes our priority. So our priorities are, our partners' priorities are those government priorities that we are supporting. When you think about, as I talked about leadership, right? It's very, very diverse. It's 44%, people of color, it's 56% women. And when you even go down in terms of the Path Global leaders, it's majority women, 62%, also majority people of those, locations. So there's that at a global, sort of larger level. Then at a micro level, when I think about internally at our own organization, what are we doing in terms of ensuring the voices of the people most impacted by our work or decisions are actually heard, is to ensure that we actually have diverse teams at that micro level, right? And the beauty about having diverse teams is that you have unique perspectives, right? You solve problems better because Mitalee will bring a unique perspective, say from India, I'll bring mine from Kenya, somebody else will bring from, Belgium and all of that, right? So our ability to make decisions and develop solutions is even better because we are a diverse team, right? And of course, if we want to understand also the health issues of the communities that we want to serve, then our teams have to be representative of those communities that we actually serve. So we're very intentional in terms of that diversity of teams, because that diversity of teams ensures that the voices are heard and decisions are not just made for, but they're made with and by those people that are most impacted by our work or the decisions that we take. At a larger level, when we think about the industry, Mitalee broadly, when we think about our sector, which is the nonprofit sector, there's still work to be done, right? We still see majority of the CEO roles are one, held by men, and two, held by folks from the global north, right? We see that from an industry perspective. That needs to change. When we think about which nonprofits actually get funding, right? It's the larger nonprofits who are largely led by, folks from the global north that actually end up getting more funds. So the work is still, they still work cut out for us. Even when we think about gender, particularly, the global health sector is 70% women, actually, who deliver the work. But at the top level, leadership is 30% women at leadership, 70% men. It actually is vice versa. Then you wonder, what really happened? We have women. Why is it that it's only men who are getting at the top? Which is, there's something called what they call the glass escalator. It's different from the glass ceiling. So the glass escalator talks about particularly a sector like ours, nonprofit, where it's majority women, but men who are in this majority women sectors like the nonprofit sector have an easier time advancing at the top as compared to women. Very slightly different from the glass ceiling in other sort of the male-dominated sectors.
You summed it up beautifully, especially when you mentioned the term intentionality and how that drives change, no matter whether we're talking about smaller organizations to bigger organizations, to systems, to societies, to be very honest. And now I will ask my final question. What advice would you give to emerging leaders who want to embrace feminist leadership, but are in environments that may not yet fully support equitable or inclusive practices?
When I think about advice, it's hard to give advice. But when I think about advice, I would say, first, you have to believe that you actually have the power to change the world. Because it's those people that actually believed that did change the world. Sometimes we think we don't have that power to change the world or to change systems or to change organizations. But I have learned from my own experience that one person can actually be a catalyst to that change. Looking at our own efforts at Path and me leading this work, of course, with support from leaders and the entire organization, but it takes that one person to believe that it can actually change, an organization can actually change the world. So it has to start from there. One has to strongly believe that you actually can change the world and change the system. So there's that. And two, start small. It could be, start, say, that women at whatever organization, start that women's group, start that Hispanic group, start that, Black, people's group, whatever it is. Start something, start small. Give your advice, say, for example, if you're a transgender or non-conforming person, say, it didn't be nice if we had gender neutral bathrooms. It didn't be nice if we had this, make your voice heard, because your voice actually matters, right? And, seek out for allies. There are many people who are for you than you would imagine. When you actually seek out these allies and supporters and champions, you'll be amazed at how many people want to be part of that change. And they will rally behind you. So I think that is the advice that I would share to someone who feels I want to make a difference, but I don't know where to start from, or I don't feel my organization is ready. Do something. You just got to do something. There's when I was in graduate school, I attended a program, and this is my final quote. It's Clinton Global Initiative University in Chicago, and Bill Clinton was one of the presenters, and he said something profound that I've never forgotten many years down the line. He said, "Catch me trying. Catch me trying." And what he was basically saying, try, just try, just give it a shot, just try, make that first step. I think that's what I would say.
You couldn't have ended this conversation on a better, inspiring note, to be very honest, Levis. Thank you so much for joining us on the EquiLead Dialogues. It was an absolute pleasure and a great learning experience listening to your thoughts and opinions. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Mitalee, for having me. It's such a joy to have been with you and sharing this with you. Thank you for having me.